Let's speak to the former war crimes prosecutor, Sir Geoffrey Nice. Sir Geoffrey was also the lead prosecutor in the trial of the former Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic in 2002. He joins us from the English city of Canterbury. Sir Geoffrey, I understand you had a preview of this report. Tell us what stands out for you.
What stands out for me is that this is an extremely detailed, evidence-based report built on earlier reports that have been made public and therefore available for challenge. And this report draws everything together with the argumentation necessary for considerations of genocide. You have three people here, two of whom have spoken extensively this morning, against whom there is no reason to think that their integrity is other than clean and proper. There's no reason to believe that they are prejudiced in any way against Israel. There is no reason that they would want to find fellow citizens guilty of this dreadful crime of genocide. And they have, in this report, and in a way that is entirely easy to understand if you spend the time with it, they have found that genocide is proved. And it is now the obligation of other countries who avoid dealing with matters in detail because they prefer to have a megaphone approach to these issues, to avoid telling their citizens, Britain, for example, not telling, or sort of the British government not telling us the truth of its analysis of what's going on. It's up to countries to back this report or to explain in detail why they don't accept it, because I think they'll find it very difficult not to accept it.
What are the legal implications for the state of Israel and also especially three leaders that the Commission has identified? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and President Isaac Herzog.
Well, there are consequences for them and also for other people, because I heard Navi Pillay say that I think other people further down the chain are similarly implicated. The consequences for all of them is that if they fall into a country which has jurisdiction to try them, then they may find that they're not going to be released. And if they fall into any country that is a state's party to the ICC, and in the case of Herzog, if he is subsequently the subject of an arrest warrant, as Navi Pillay indicated really he should be, then they will be arrested and handed over to the court. Now, I think you've got to recognize that we live in a very strange world where Mr. Trump, the President of the United States of America, is almost bound to fall in line with Israel's wholesale rejection of the report and try to weaken the power of the court. Now is the time for countries who have been sucking up to President Trump, but presumably with their fingers crossed behind their backs, is for them to say, no, the law has got to rule. And if these people turn up in ICC states parties, they will be arrested. And the same will then apply for anybody else if the International Criminal Court prosecutor expands his list of those who are subject to arrest warrant.
Would prosecutors look at the issue of genocide as a whole, or would they break it down into the different categorizations? The Commission saying that 4 out of the 5 categorizations of genocide have been fulfilled in terms of Israeli actions in Gaza, because we have both the actions and also, as the Commission was saying, the words that incite genocide.
I think that's slightly the wrong way around. I don't mean that disrespectfully.
Please explain. Yeah, please.
In genocide, what you're concerned with is whether the mental state is proved in the way it has to be proved, either against individuals or against a state, in this case, the state of Israel. And you don't get off the ground for a genocide investigation or prosecution unless the mental state is proved. Once the mental state is proved, then you have to look to see whether any of the 5 possible ways in which the mental state then becomes a genocidal act because it's driven one of these 5 actions. And so I think there won't be any separation, because you don't get through to the 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 5 identified by the Commission unless you find the mental state. But once you find the mental state, then you must look at all 5. So I don't think they'll be broken down. I think they'll all be looked at. And it was very interesting to see the very categorical way in which Mr. Sidoti, who was answering the questions at the time, explained the clarity of the evidence, particularly in relation to the killing limb of the four of the five limbs, but also he was pretty emphatic about the other three. And I'm sure that your viewers will want to remind themselves that the gravity of genocide is not actually only in the killing. Killing may be genocide, but killing may not be genocide. The gravity of genocide is the mental state, because the mental state reflects an intention by one part of humanity to destroy another part of humanity simply because of whom they are. And they can destroy them in one of five ways if it's to become criminal. And so it's a very, very serious crime because of the mental state. And the mental state is shown historically, looking at other acts that have been described as genocidal. The mental state is irreversible. Once you instill individuals, leaders, or followers, or whoever you like, with genocidal intent, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to remove it from them. And so you have a group of people who, until their natural death, if they suffer a natural death, will always find themselves infected by this genocidal intent.
So, Geoffrey, when you're talking about a mental state, does that mental state, is it determined, again, just by the language that is used? Because Navi Pillay talked about Benjamin Netanyahu calling Gaza City a wicked city. She said that is an example of how the Israeli Prime Minister categorized everyone in one location as being wicked, rather than just possibly members of Hamas. In terms of the language that is used, what you experienced in 2002 when prosecuting Slobodan Milosevic and what you've heard from the Israeli government, do you see similarities?
Answering the first bit of your question, no, you look at all the evidence, and the report makes it quite clear. You look at all of the evidence. Of course, the express observations by Netanyahu, and now we know Herzog, as well as Gallant, that constitute an expression of genocidal intent is only one part of it. You also look at the wholesale destruction, the killing of children, the attack on the fertility clinics, and so on. And you look at all the evidence and you say, by what is this? Are these activities, this range of activities, by what are they driven? And you come to the conclusion, well, they've got to be driven by an intention, a purpose. Is it the purpose that Israel says, namely self-defense? Well, in an earlier report, this commission said no to that. And you look at all the evidence and you say, what is the inference, the only inference? It has to be the only reasonable inference to draw, again, as Navi Pillay has said. And if that inference is that it's the mental state of genocide, then that's what you find. So you're not restricted just to a particular observation. The last part of your question, the particular example that she referred to about a whole city, yes, that's a terrible thing to say, because you are gathering a whole group of people whose individual attitude towards events, whose spoken words, whose thoughts, whose attitude towards their family and to other families, and so on and so forth, is simply not known. You cannot say that. And in saying that, what you're trying to do is to get your listeners and your supporters and those who are going to go out and do the things you want them to do, to think that all these people can be categorized in the same way. And that's exactly what happened in Nazi Germany, when people were persuaded that the Jewish people who were subject to the Holocaust were the same people not worthy of life and not to be treated as human beings. So it's only an example, what she said, but it's an important example.
Could you just explain a legal issue here? Navi Pillay was asked about the genocide finding, and then she answered a question from a journalist, said, no, a court will have to determine that. What will the Commission's findings mean to the ICJ, which is looking at the South Africa case about possibly genocide being committed in Gaza, but also the ICC, which has arrest warrants out for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant?
Well, she rather changed. She explained how she changed her thinking because she moved back from the position, or maybe forwards, from the position of thinking that it could only ever be a subject dealt with by a court. I've always felt that approach is ridiculous. I don't mean that offensively about her earlier her earlier thinking position is ridiculous. And here's why. Genocide is something that doesn't stop until it is stopped by external forces in nearly all cases. And I've been compelled, because our English politicians don't seem particularly sharp on these issues, to try and help them with a very simple example. If you walk down a street and through an open door on one side you see a man hitting a woman, maybe his partner or wife, over the head with a brick in a way that's bound to kill her, do you say to yourself, oh, it looks as though that might be rather serious, I better get a judge along to decide whether I should go in and do something? Of course you don't. You can see what's happening, and you know that the only way you're going to save that woman from being killed is by going in and stopping it. Now, that is the duty of governments in respect of genocide. And the Genocide Convention actually makes that clear. There is nothing, not one word in the Genocide Convention that suggests that before states act under their undertaking, given in Article 1, their duty to act immediately, as the International said, there's nothing to say that that act has to be preceded by a judicial determination of genocide. The reverse. If you read the Genocide Convention in straightforward terms, it's a simple document. It's clear that you the government, have to act. So in a way, I think what Nave Pillay told us very candidly about her change of position was that she changed from a mistaken position of great caution, typical, I suppose, of the cautious lawyer. She changed from that position to recognizing that her commission should deal with this issue in the way that they have now dealt with it. She also made quite clear, going back to the open door and the man hitting the woman over the head with a brick, she made quite clear by spelling out the realities why that's important. She said that the decision of the International Court of Justice, which is one of two courts which might make a judicial finding, isn't to be expected for 2 years. Far too long. When the ICJ itself said in the Bosnia-Serbia case that you have to act immediately on seeing genocide happening or likely to happen. And therefore, I think her second viewpoint is in line with the reality of the convention, common sense, and the duty we all have to save those who we know are suffering unfairly as a result of criminal behavior by another state.
We heard Chris Sidoti talk about Israel's attacks on children, the destructions of the conditions of life. He listed at least 12, 13, 14 different aspects of infrastructure that have made Gaza pretty much unlivable. If you were prosecuting Israel in this case, what sort of legal defense do you think you would be faced with? What would Israel come up with in terms of its defense against these findings?
Its only defense is that it was justified in self-defense and or in recovering of the hostages.
Sorry, so Geoffrey, how does killing children come under a terminology of self-defense?
It doesn't. You were asking me what sort of defense I would face.
Yes.
And that is the defense I would face. And then you say, but hang on.
Yeah.
Whatever you're doing, A, it can't be revenge. There's no justification for revenge. And B, you have to act proportionately. And where you find yourselves, where we find you, killing children intentionally and in very large, disproportionately large numbers, and so on and so forth, there can be no proportionality in your actions. So that is the only defense they can raise. They have no other defense. And by and large, all commentators, apart from those from the State of Israel itself, think that proportionality simply cannot, in the present circumstances, and for a long time in the past, since those terrible events of the 7th of October, which everybody accepts were criminal almost beyond belief, they don't justify this. This is disproportionate.
So, Geoffrey, as someone who has prosecuted, understood, been intimately involved in these sorts of issues for so long, How will the UN, how will Navi Pillay, how will Chris Sidoti, anyone at the ICJ, at the ICC, this is away from your legal expertise, but how do you deal with it personally? Because for the past 2 years, the whole world has watched what's happening in Gaza, and many people can't watch it any longer.
Yeah, I don't think that personal emotions should be allowed to interfere. And I never speak of mine, possibly because I try and avoid having any. You have, and it's not just lawyers and people in the very important position that Navi Pillay has, who will be responding to your question if they find themselves facing it in the same way. We have a duty as human beings, whether we are highly placed people like those on this commission or whether we are jurors in a criminal trial. We have a duty to our fellow citizens, part of a common humanity, to look at the evidence and say what we should do. And once you find yourself looking at the evidence just simply as a human being, you should set aside all personal concerns and disappointments. Now, you're quite right that it's been so sustained and so visible to us on the television that many of us want to look away. You should never look away. Your duty doesn't find itself ended because you're tired of your duty. Your duty continues. And what I think we all of us, particularly in a country like ours, have as a problem to face is that our governments don't want us to look at the detail. They do want us to look away because they want to make decisions that have nothing to do with the rights and the interests of those who are being attacked and killed and dealt with in the other 4 genocidal ways that this commission has found. Because they want to make political decisions, sucking up to President Trump or not challenging Netanyahu or trying to bury the historical culpability that Great Britain, for example, bears in respect of the various problems besetting Israel for the last 125 years, for a whole range of reasons, commercial reasons as well. Governments don't want people to know too much about the detail. And I'm afraid as citizens, especially now citizens facing such a dangerous world, it's going to be harder for us individually to decide we can look away when there will come a time in, for example, democracies where we will have a chance to vote, and our voting may be in respect, amongst other things, of what the attitude should be taken towards Palestinians and the state of Israel, which certainly demands all our support, providing it behaves in a legal way. We need to be properly informed. We cannot look away.
So, Geoffrey, just one final question, if you don't mind. Really appreciate you spending so much time with us. Earlier this month, there was an in absentia hearing in The Hague for Joseph Kony, the former Ugandan warlord who's been on the run for more than 10 years. The first ever in absentia hearing. So there are 2 questions, really. Do you think Benjamin Netanyahu will ever face justice? And will that in absentia hearing for Joseph Kony possibly make a difference?
I don't think I'm well enough informed and haven't looked into the detail to answer the second point, whether that would act as a precedent for Netanyahu. On the first question, whether Netanyahu might ever face justice, very unlikely, because even if America is a diminishing world power, it remains at the moment the strongest power. And Trump has been extraordinarily irresponsible in expressing views about culpability, but more important, in saying what he will and will not do to try and stop investigations and prosecutions of individuals taking place. And it's always occurred to me as a sad reality that if and when the time comes when either there are 2 wars going on. There's the Putin war, and then there's the Israel-Gaza conflict. When they're about to come to resolution, which they will, of course, come to at some stage, almost inevitably, the first clause of the resolution will be that either Putin or Netanyahu will not face a trial. Now, how that will be forced through an allegedly independent judicial system of the International Criminal Court is not something easy for me to forecast at the moment. I just feel it will happen. and it will happen by force of money, by withdrawal of funding, by forcing other countries to compel the ICC to do what, for commercial reasons, they may decide they must do in falling in with Trump's wishes. We're living in an age where Trump wants there to be no international legal order. And unless he is thwarted by countries that are braver in respect of him or in confronting him than they've been so fast, he's likely to win. However, having said that rather gloomy prospect in a sense, nobody expected Milosevic to be tried or Charles Taylor, and yet they were. So things can change, and we must hope that by whatever mechanism, the international humanitarian law will be effective and will rule and will bring people who may have committed the most serious of crimes to be properly investigated and tried.
Yeah, Charles Taylor, the former Liberian president. Sir Geoffrey Nice, thank you so much indeed. We really needed your expertise on this breaking story.